Okay, so I figured this year I would make a little video talking about what cars I'm choosing to run at the Vintage Off-Road Nationals. This year is 2019. The Vonage race is coming up in about a week and a half. So, I'm getting everything ready. I'm, packing all my equipment. I'm charging batteries. Just making sure everything's ready to go. All my tools are ready to go, everything. And yes, I did say I'm charging my batteries a week and a half in advance. And the reason why I charge my batteries in advance is because I like to be able to show up at the track and be ready to go right there. So I can, set up my pit equipment and, within like 5 or 10 minutes, I'm ready to run practice laps. A lot of people don't do that. They show up and they bring all their stuff and then they sit around for like an hour or two charging their batteries. Like, what the hell are you doing? Charge your batteries beforehand, get ready to go so that the moment you get there, you're ready to start practicing. So anyway, I digress. What I'm going to try to do this year is to run almost entirely Kyosho for pretty much every class I'm running. Actually, I did forget to get one other car out. It's this guy. This is the only non-Kyosho that I will be running. Okay, so we'll start with this one. So all the classes I'm running, the same classes I ran last year. The Classic class, the 4-wheel drive buggy class, the Classic 4-wheel drive buggy class, Stadium truck, and 2-wheel drive buggy. Okay, so for Classic, that class is, for those who don't know, intended for plastic tub chassis. So the past couple times I raced at Vonage, I raced my Tamiya Dirt Thrasher in the Classic class. It's a DF01 chassis, basically like a longer wheelbase TA02 with wider arms. And it's a fantastic chassis. I really like driving that car, but I figured I'd try something a little bit different this time because it was, let's say a little bit too easy to win that class with that car. So maybe I'll come back to that car another year, but I want to try a 2-wheel drive chassis. So then I got to thinking about, what are all the different 2-wheel drive chassis I could try to run in Classic, and then among those, which could be competitive. So there are essentially two choices for 2-wheel drive cars in that Classic class. If the exceptions that they allow for plastic tub chassis or non-plastic tub chassis are the original 6-gear RC10 and the Team Losi JRX2. Those do not have plastic tub chassis, but they're also not entirely competitive in the 2-wheel drive buggy class. So they're in this sort of middle space. And they allow you to run those cars in the Classic class with the exception, if you will, or on a condition that you use the original small wheels, so like the 2-inch wheels or 1.9-inch wheels with the original compound tires, which are a very hard compound tire. And you could sauce those up all you like, you're not going to get a whole lot of grip with them. So every single year I see people running 6-gear RC10s and Losi JRX2s. I know I'm going to run circles around those guys because they just don't have enough grip to get around the track quickly for the types of dirt that we run on now at this event. So I thought about running a Kyosho Raider, which I thought would be really cool because it would allow me to run Kyosho for everything. And the Raider is a mid-motor chassis, so that would be kind of neat to run like the first mid-motor Classic 2-wheel drive buggy. But the problems with the Raider are it's a very simple chassis, so it's rather primitive, it's not very adjustable. It has a gear differential, which, and the gear differential, by the way, is not an oil-filled differential. It's just like an open, planetary gear diff. So it's like an old, like Tamiya Striker or something. Once the rear, one of the inner wheels lifts up, the thing diffs out and you don't really go. So the lack of adjustability on the Kyosho Raider made me sort of think twice about running that. The Kyosho Outrage would be another option. That's a rear-wheel drive buggy. It seems to share a lot of components with the Raider, but again, it has a gear diff. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not too familiar with it also, so I figured, I'd rather not deal with that. And there's another guy at the event who has a Kyosho Outrage, and he's actually pretty quick with it, but he made a lot of changes to that car. So I decided on the Traxxas Rad 2. The Rad 2 came out in the early 90s, I think around 92 or 93, thereabouts, and it's a lot like a Traxxas TRX1. It has, Hawk front arms, Hawk rear arms, more or less. You could say it has a Hawk gearbox, but it's a bit closer to a TRX-3 gearbox. So to me, it's actually a lot like a TRX-3 in terms of the suspension geometry and the adjustability, all the changes you can make to roll center, camber gain, shock angle, all of it. And the drivetrain is very similar to like the TRX-3 or the TRX-1, I guess. But the only exception is that it has a plastic tub chassis. So, you know, this is almost, I hate to say it, but it's almost like cheating in the classic class, because it is really quite a good buggy. You know, it could theoretically hold its own in the conventional two-wheel drive buggy class. The only thing really holding this buggy back is the fact that it has Ackerman steering. So basically that means that the steering links are directly connected to the servo saver. There's no bell crank or anything like that. So, you know, sometimes that's a hindrance for steering performance, because it doesn't give you much adjustability for bump steer or Ackerman. But, you know, it's functional. So I think this is going to do really, really well in the classic class because of the fact that it has a plastic tub chassis. That means you can use modern racing tires. So I can use 2.2-inch rims with, you know, M4 compound electrons or, you know, inversions or whatever, and this thing's going to fly. So I'm really confident in this car. For two-wheel drive buggy, I'm going to run the same car I ran last year, my Kyosho Rampage Pro E. That's the mid-motor, essentially mid-motor version of the Kyosho Pro X. I've, you know, ranted and raved about this car a whole bunch while I was going through the build series last year, and after last year's vintage race, and how much I loved driving that car. It's a great car. It feels a lot like an RB6, just in terms of like that mid-motor feel. Really suitable for modern, you know, hard-packed, medium to high grip dirt. So, you know, very adjustable. I love that car. I really have no reason to drive an RC10 ever again for a vintage race, because this car is just so great. I did make a few small setup changes to the rear suspension. I went a little bit lighter on the rear shock oil, and I also changed the rear camber gain a little bit. Because when I looked at very closely at the running videos I had from last year's race, especially as the grip level went up, I had, you know, a kind of mid-corner to corner exit, the car tended to like kind of slide out a little bit, and so I'm thinking maybe that's like at full, you know, suspension load, the suspension's compressing a bit much, and I'm starting to ride the outer sidewall of the tire, and then the car's losing grip. So I figured, you know, rather than increase the roll center to reduce roll, because that could actually make the car like a little bit too slidey mid-corner, I figured to just go increase the camber gain a little bit, and that should help me maintain grip in the sort of late mid-corner portion of the corner. So we'll see how that goes. You know, I'm expecting that the grip level of the track will be the same as it was last year, because it's the same facility, same track surface, same dirt, same everything. So I'm anticipating more or less the same track conditions. But I have a, you know, a slightly better understanding of some of the things I can do to that car to improve the performance this time around. So I'm really looking forward to having a second go with that car. For the stadium truck, I'm still debating between these two. On the left here, you see the Kyosho Pro XRT. I have an RT5 body on that. And in the middle here is the Kyosho Outlaw Rampage Pro E. That's the electric conversion of the Outlaw Rampage Pro. This is basically a truck version of this chassis right here, this buggy chassis. They're the exact same chassis, you know, but this is the truck version, so the front nose plate's a little bit longer. You have the truck suspension arms, the truck shock towers, all of it. But, you know, these are basically like brother and sister. So it's a mid-motor truck, and holy shit, this thing is fast. So, you know, right now, because I don't get to go to an actual track, I just have to do testing on my driveway, which is an asphalt driveway, and I kind of have to assume that the grip level is, even though it's a bit high compared to dirt, it's sort of in the right ballpark. And, you know, I've been testing all of these cars, you know, on the driveway, like really late at night when I have time to, and, you know, this thing corners really nice, it feels really good. I just had a bit of an issue with grinding spur gears on this thing. And that had to do with the fact that if you go back in my build videos, when I talk about either of these two mid-motor chassis, the way the slipper hub mounts onto the input shaft or output shaft, depending on what you call it, because it was originally a nitro car, that spur gear is pretty far out, which means that when you mount the pinion gear on the motor, the pinion is pretty far out on the motor shaft. And on the Rampage Pro E, it's actually, it seems to work okay, but on this one, because probably because I'm running boost on it, and on the buggy I'm not, so I get higher RPM on this motor, and it at low RPM it's fine, but at higher RPM the motor shaft wobbles, and that causes the spacing between the pinion and the spur, the mesh changes, and then it just grinds the spur instantaneously. And I must have gone through, you know, 3 or 4 spur gears trying to figure this out, and I used like the super high quality Robinson Racing machine spur gears. Those are like $7 each, so it was expensive. I went through like $30 worth of gears trying to figure out what was going on with this thing. But essentially what I ended up doing is, if I just take this out here, I'll take the body off. You basically mount just 2 spur gears. So you see this spur gear on the inside, that's a steel spur gear. It's a 35-2 spur gear. So it's basically steel with a lot of teeth, so it's high mass, and I mount that on the inside of the shaft, and that helps to basically provide more uniform mass distribution from the inside to the outside of the shaft. And on the outside I'm using a lightweight aluminum pinion. So doing this, and you know, testing this without the spur gear on so I don't grind anything, I can go full throttle on this and I don't get any wobble. It's actually, it really helps. So this is actually a tip for you guys if you're going to do this build on the Outlaw Rampage Pro E, or even for the buggy. You might want to consider, because of the amount of spacing you need to get the pinion to mesh with this, the spur on this particular drivetrain, to mount an additional pinion gear on the inside here. It does add rotational mass, and so you could say, well, it's going to affect acceleration, but it's better, you know, you're not going to accelerate if your spur gear is all ground to hell. So you kind of have to have this. And it's really not that, I mean, I haven't noticed a difference, especially if you are running boost, as you are allowed to do at the Vintage Race. The fact that you can run boost really compensates for any, you know, increase in rotational mass you have to put on the motor shaft in order to basically stabilize the pinion gear. So it's a net win. I tried this out, it works. I'm not grinding spur gears, so you know, this is really promising. So I'm leaning towards running this, because at least that way I have a mid-motor truck and a mid-motor buggy, same exact platform. They're kind of like brother and sister. So you know, I'm kind of leaning toward running this for the stadium truck class at the Vintage Race. But at the same time, the Pro XRT is freaking awesome. I really, really like that truck. Again, driveway testing only, but it feels great. Of course, because it's rear motor, it has a bit more push, but for that exact reason, it feels more comfortable pushing it into a corner, you know, and I've always been really good with rear motor stadium trucks. So if you go back through my racing video history, my Kyosho RT6, I set that up as a rear motor truck. When I used to have an Associated T4.1, I had several actually. Those are all rear motor trucks, and they were just super fast. So I really feel good driving a rear motor truck. You know, mid-motor trucks I can be pretty good with, like my RC10 GTE. I won a lot of races with that. And, you know, so I'm kind of going back and forth between whether I want to run this because it's a bit more, you could say, vintage appropriate. And I'm kind of curious to see how it would do. Or whether I want to run this because it pairs up well with the mid-motor buggy. One thing I'm thinking is I'll bring the truck as a backup. But ultimately I may end up running this in a future vintage race. If by then I can have a Pro X rear motor buggy built and set up, so then I can have like a rear motor truck and a rear motor buggy, and I can run those two as like a brother-sister pair. And I have no shortage of Pro X's. I got like one up there, I got one up there that I got to rebuild, I got like 2 or 3 in here. So I'm going to build a Pro X one day. It's just a matter of when. So maybe, you know, that would be appropriate to run with this truck. So that's kind of where I am with Stadium Truck. Haven't decided yet. Got to make a decision very soon. Now the fun part is with four-wheel drive buggy. So I was really debating about what I wanted to do here, and as you guys know, for those who see my videos, you know, rather frequently, I have no shortage of choice when it comes especially to vintage four-wheel drive buggies. I have a lot of vintage four-wheel drive buggies, various Yokomo YZ10s, Schumacher Cat 2000s, some Kyosho cars. So I'm kind of spoiled for choice here. Last year for classic four-wheel drive buggy, I ran my Yokomo 93 Works, and although I won the race, the car was not necessarily the fastest car on the grid, and I felt like at the time I wanted to, you know, make some adjustments to the car to make it even better and bring it back this year and really kick ass with that car. And you know, I did make some setup changes to this. I changed you know, the shock ends so I could have longer shock ends to get more droop. I put a shorter bumper on it so that the leading edge of the bumper isn't ahead of the front wheels. That gives me more of a higher approach angle for jumps, so it doesn't, like, you know, dig into the jump faces. I changed the rear camber gain a little bit to give me a bit more cornering. So, you know, and I think I redid the shocks. So, like, this car is really going to be mint, I think, if I take it back this year to run it in the classic four-wheel drive class. I'm very confident this is going to be a very fast car. So it's really a question between, like, that and running something that I haven't run yet, because I have run this several times. I'm just getting closer to perfection with the setup for this car for the track conditions that I'm going to be racing it on. So that was my dilemma, because, you know, over the past few months I've been rebuilding a Kyosho Laser ZX-RR. So this is one of the later versions of the Kyosho, vintage Kyosho Laser, and I rebuilt it thinking I was just going to rebuild it as a shelfer, and then as I got closer to finishing it, I figured, oh, why don't I make it a runner? And so then I started, you know, putting electronics in it and really trying to make it, you know, work right. And then I did some driveway testing, and this thing felt amazing. So, you know, I was at a point where I had to make a decision. I figured, well, why don't I try something new? I'm kind of doing a Kyosho theme this year, so let me run the Laser ZX-RR in the classic four-wheel drive buggy class. Again, classic four-wheel drive buggy is pre-1995 with a 13.5 motor. You can run boost if you want. So I spent a lot of time experimenting with different boost profiles and, you know, some gearing profiles. I think I'm in a good place with that. One of the things I did with the ZX-RR, and I could say what is special to the ZX-RR, what's unique to that is it came with LA59 front caster, front caster blocks. The ZX-R Mark 1 and Mark 2, and even the ZX Laser came with the LA27 caster blocks. And the difference between them is the LA27 caster blocks give you a narrower front end with a smaller caster angle, and that makes the front very responsive. It's very, very sharp steering, especially on turn-in, which is good on, say, small, tight tracks, but the problem is on, like, larger tracks with wider turns, or just generally, like, with, you know, straight line stability, it's not as good. And when I had my previous Laser ZX-R runner, you know, I had that problem, and then I sold it because I didn't really fix the problem. I didn't have time to. So on this one, I have Teamline C-hubs, as you can see, these green C-hubs, which give you the option for either of the LA27 or LA59 holes. So with the LA59 holes, that allows you to, it essentially widens the front, and it also increases the caster, so that really, like, it numbs the front a little bit. It makes it much easier to, like, push into corners and really drive the car hard. Much more comfortable to drive the car. So I'm really happy with how I think this car is going to go. So I really want to play with this, and I'm sort of confident that, you know, when I do get back to running the 93 Works Yokomo, that it's going to be perfectly fine. So I'm thinking, okay, this year I'll run the Laser in that class, and then we'll see, you know, where to take it from there. Four-wheel drive buggy was another kind of dilemma, because last year I ran my Schumacher Cat 2000, which is up there. Felt awesome. Really drives great, very neutral, easy to, you know, like, comfortably drive it fast. Reminded me a lot of my old, you know, what I used to have, my Losi 22.4. Kind of felt the same way. Very neutral behavior. And there were some setup changes that I felt I wanted to make it a little bit better. And then I started thinking about, you know, running, like, one of my Yokomo YZ10s, my later model YZ10s, in that class. So again, the four-wheel drive buggy class, you run a 10.5 motor. Boost is allowed, but since you're running a 10.5, you don't really need it. So this YZ10 I'm using to essentially replace my 94 YZ10, because that car I got to rebuild the diffs and sort of clean everything up. So this is a 95 YZ10 with a 97 upper deck. And the 97 upper deck is a two-piece upper deck with a spring in the middle. And what's great about this is that, you know, that spring helps you absorb chassis flex as you're going over jumps and things. And with the 94 YZ10 and 95 YZ10, it had a one-piece upper deck that tended to snap at these two front mounting holes here. And so I had to, like, play tricks with having, like, a little Kydex piece here to give it some flex. And it was, you know, it works, but it was a little funky. And also that one-piece upper deck had adjustable front belt tension. This one, the belt tension adjustment holes are fixed. So there's no belt tension adjustment, and it's, you know, pretty I wouldn't say super tight, but it's about the right setting for the front belt tension, so you don't need to adjust the belt tension. So I really like that, and I really wanted to try this out. For that reason, I also put a ZD304S motor mount in this. I got this in another YZ10 that I recently purchased, and the ZD304S has roller bearing mounting points to really hold especially the rear belt down on the center pulley. This is really good to avoid belt skipping, so I really wanted to try this car with the upper deck and with this motor mount. And, I know this car is super fast from how I had set up, very similar chassis in my 94 YZ10. So I figured if I run this one in four-wheel drive buggy, it's going to be extremely competitive. So what I'm thinking is next time, at one of the next times, I'll run these two together in classic and, say, standard four-wheel drive buggy. And this year, I'll run my Laser and then my Inferno 10E in the four-wheel drive buggy class. Now, four-wheel drive buggy is supposed to be for 1995 and after four-wheel drive buggies, like the Losi XX4 and I think like the BJ4 and some of the others, like the Yokomo MX4. This Kyosho Inferno 10 was made in 1993. It's a pre-95 car, so technically it should be in the classic four-wheel drive buggy class. But they do allow you to run pre-95 cars in the standard four-wheel drive buggy class, so it's kind of like a loose rule there as far as like moving up like that. And I put a lot of time into this build. I really wanted to run it. And, I again, driveway testing, I've been playing around with the setup. I think I'm at a place where the car feels about right. I did the same thing with the front caster blocks here. I don't have another set of Teamline hubs, but I am using original Kyosho LA59 front caster blocks here. So that really, makes the steering feel much better, much like the Laser. You do have to use wider universals for that, and, to account for the larger front track width. Okay, fine. But yes, this feels really great. I'm really looking forward to driving it, also because it's very new. Like, this is probably the first nitro conversion of a vintage four-wheel drive buggy that will be run at Vonats. So for that reason alone, I want to run it to sort of like a feature of what's possible when you really put the effort into doing these kinds of nitro conversions, nitro to electric conversions. So that's my thinking at the moment. So this will be the first year, with the exception of the very first year I ran at this race, where I won't be running any Yokomo cars, which is a little depressing, but it's also kind of interesting because I have some new stuff that I really want to try. And maybe I'll bring one or two of these if I have room in the car to pack these with me, just to try them on the track. Maybe like to confirm the setup changes that I made to the 93 works. If I can bring this with me just to run it and try it, just to make sure that I made the right changes, like, okay, I'd like to do that. But if I did that, then that could take track time away from getting enough practice in with essentially every car here, with the exception of my buggy, being a new car for me. So I need to make sure these are all set up correctly. So, I'd love to bring these if I can, but I do understand that could be a distraction from making sure these are actually ready to go for the race. So that's also another decision I have to make. But yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. And I hope you found this at least kind of informative, and it was nice to be able to kind of explain my thinking here for how I plan these vintage races. Every year for the vintage race, I want to do something different and new and challenging, and